the State Attorney's Office, Mr. Don Horn, who's here. And I'm not sure if Mr. Horn is actually giving a presentation or he's just here to answer any questions. So if you could come forward. The latter. Okay. All right. So then this item was sponsored by the Vice Chairman, Mr. Ken Russell, and it's in order. You want to be recognized for a second?
After the Vice Chair makes his comments, I'd like to say something as well.
Yes.
Thank you. CRAs, Community Redevelopment Agencies. There's 170-something of them in the state of Florida, and they get quite a beating in the press, and the reputation is not golden, which is a shame because the task of these agencies is to do tremendous good. And in full disclosure, when I was campaigning, I was looking for CRA reform as one of the things that I brought about. I was studying, at least in my district, wondering why certain communities, such as the West Grove, did not have a CRA, and would that be a good thing for it, something I'd like to look into in the future. But then I started realizing there's so many problems that are reported about the CRAs. You know, how is it possible to fix it rather than abolish it? Is it possible to use it for what it was intended? And I was encouraged also during my campaign to hear Commissioner Xavier Suarez as well as Daniel Levine Cava from the county looking for that reform. There was an appetite for that. So when I was elected, and I definitely volunteered to be the chair of the Omni CRA, which I am now. We have yet to have our first meeting, but in leading up to that, this grand jury report was issued, and for me, it's somewhat of a godsend to see a roadmap of potential suggestions come down from the state's attorney's office at a timing when I was actually looking for what can we do to strengthen and fix the reputation of these agencies. They're certainly not all broken, and they're certainly not I believe the intention of the CRAs is being honored. I think what gets us into trouble is some of the practice, some of the procedures. What they do is definitely make things more efficient for a city to carry out the plan. Are we truly following that plan? Is it being monitored properly? Are we taking the best steps for transparency and involvement of the public? And there were 29 recommendations that were brought about by the grand jury, some of which have to be carried out by the state, some of which have to be carried out at the board level of each CRA, and perhaps some of which we as a city commission could have a say in. And so I asked our city attorney to give an opinion on which of those items, of those 29 recommendations, we could look at as a commission. And I reached out to Professor Frank Schnidman, who wrote me back a letter, which I meant to pass around earlier, but he's here today, so I might ask him to speak in a moment as well. And I invited that the state's attorney's office come if they had any suggestions for us amongst those 29, and I guess it's partly for us to understand from our city attorney as well what things we could look at. But most importantly, I wanted to open up the conversation with my fellow commissioners to sort of get their impressions of the grand jury report, if it's been studied by them, and where we should go from here. Thank you.
Commissioner Suarez. Mr.
Chair, thank you. First and foremost, I really want to thank the Vice Chair for bringing this issue before us. I want to thank Mr. Horn and the State Attorney and Mr. Vander Giesen for the report. I've often said as a CRA board member, and I remember when our good chair of Overtown was first elected, that being a CRA board member was one of the most frustrating parts of my job. And part of the reason why is because, particularly prior to our chair being elected, I felt that the CRA wasn't moving fast enough, particularly in some areas where, since his election, I have to admit, and I remember the first meeting that we had, if you recall, Mr. Chair, where I challenged you, and I think you were kind of taken aback a little bit by it, but you responded very well to that, you know, and I think not only am I thankful for it, but I think the community is thankful for it, because we've seen the byproduct of that action, particularly in Overtown, where we've decided on a policy basis to do affordable housing right away, to do rehab right away, to do job training that works right away. And I think you're starting to see the difference in Overtown. and I think that's evident by the work that you've done. You know, there are a lot of people that don't like CRAs. They don't like the concept of CRAs. They think it's social engineering or whatever the case may be. As the vice chair said, they can be a force for good. They can be a force for good if we engage. The important thing is to engage and to make good decisions. And I think I've read some of his comments about the Omni CRA, in particular in the media, and I'm encouraged by the direction that he seems to want to take the Omni CRA, because I really do think that in the case of Omni, it has focused on major projects. And I think now that that has happened, I think we can use some of the resources from those projects to do what is also sorely needed in the Omni area, which is affordable housing, which we've done in Overtown. And I will say that the report makes many recommendations, many of which I agree with, if not all of them. I do think there is one further recommendation that we can make, which goes to procedures. I like the procedures that the City Commission has with reference to getting the agenda 5 days in advance, the 5-day rule, setting our meetings, you know, with a certain amount of notice and regularity. And I think that's something that we can do better. Look, we saw this. We just had an issue now with the Justice Department. We have an issue regarding CIP reform, which is a citizen body that is supposed to look over and, you know, our processes. I am of the opinion that scrutiny can be very good, can be very positive. It can be something that we can use to enact positive reforms, and that's how I take it. You know, I don't take it as a criticism. I take it as constructive criticism, constructive feedback. And I think we should always be open for that, because we can always do better. We can always work harder. And but I am very happy with what I feel is the direction, particularly the new direction of both our CRAs, and I think that's something that we should be proud of, and that's something that we should talk about. Thank you.
I would like to ask, because there's this mysticism that comes about when you hear about grand jury reports, and if the Assistant State Attorney, Don Horn, could explain to us just the process of who's involved with a grand jury report, how the information is presented to them, if there is any counter evidence that is presented, once they receive that information, how they come out making a decision, who writes the reports in that area, and so that we know and the community knows exactly what goes into a grand jury report.
Absolutely. Good morning. My name is Don Horn, Chief Assistant State Attorney for Administration in Dade County State Attorney's Office. I'm also General Counsel for the Miami-Dade County Grand Jury, 1350 Northwest 12th Avenue. I've been doing this now, I guess, about 14 years in my capacity as a Chief Assistant for Administration. Our grand jury is comprised of 21 citizens who get selected from the same role that regular jurors get called down for either civil or criminal. They don't find out under the new system until they get here and they get called down to the courtroom that they're actually going to be questioned about serving for 6 months instead of possibly a couple of days. And so they come from, you name it, whatever kind of walks of life, ages, demographics, races, genders, ethnicities, etc. We get them selected. Also 7 alternates, and sometimes we've actually gone through 7 alternates because of things that come up. And during the course of what we call their Law 101 class, to educate them about their primary responsibility, which is to educate them about the law relating to homicides, because their first responsibility is to consider evidence and make a determination as to whether there's sufficient probable cause to issue an indictment. That is their statutory obligation, because although we can charge anybody who commits a crime in Dade County with everything in the statute, we cannot charge first-degree murder. The law does not want to give that much power to one person. So those cases go to the grand jury. One of the things that we also tell them is the practice for our county is, in addition to that duty and responsibility, one of the things we have done here since the days of Ms. Reno is issue grand jury reports. And one of the statements that the state attorneys usually make to them, if you've ever, looked at situations, issues, problems going on in our community and says, you know what, if I ever had a chance to do something about this problem with fill in the blank, well, now you got that opportunity. How so? Because part of this process will be the grand jurors in the room will say, well, I think we ought to look into this. Well, no, I think we ought to look into this. Well, no, I think we ought to look into this. And we go through a democratic process, and they actually take a vote. Sometimes there's a winnowing process. Sometimes we bring several people in on several different topics before they actually select the topic that they want to investigate. All of our grand jury reports are present on our website, miamisao.com, under publications, and you will see that we have had topics as varied as police use of force, tasers, mental health, housing, public housing specifically, affordable housing differently, fire safety in our public school systems, juvenile delinquency, parks and recreations, traffic, you name it. There's probably been a grand jury over the course of the last several decades that have investigated. So once they decide the topic they want to investigate, we go about sending out invitations to folks and asking them to come down and educate grand jurors and us about their process. Mr. Shipman was kind enough to come down and meet with us in the state attorney's office to help educate us. And again, whatever the topic is, we're getting educated too, those of us who are presenting the witnesses. So pretty much we bring witnesses down, and just as they do with the detectives who are presenting testimony regarding the indictments, they have the opportunity also to ask questions of any and all of the witnesses that we bring down. They then have suggestions, recommendations about other witnesses they want to hear based on the testimony and information that they've gotten. And oftentimes we're asking the witness on the stand, okay, who else can we talk to? Do you have any other recommendations we can get for other people who can educate them on the process? And pretty much we go through that process for every topic on every investigation, for every report that gets issued. So at the end of the day, it's not our report, it's the grand jury report, and just like they do on the indictments, they actually vote to accept the report, and we're going through and we're proofing and editing, and everybody's in the room. And you imagine 21 people going through a report. Okay, we're on page 3. Well, no, I don't think that's right. I think we need to change. That's the process, as daunting as that is. So that's pretty much how we end up with the report. And it's we as we say, it's the view from the representatives of this community, because they come from all over the community.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that's important because what it informs us of is that it's a layman's report.
Yes, sir.
It is someone who, just like a jury of your peers, is selected and who don't know much information about the law, or perhaps does, or maybe they do. They may or may not be from particularly the boundaries of, for instance, any CRA whatsoever. And so I say that because, and you can have a seat, unless someone has questions for him, you can have a seat. But I say that because when I read the grand jury report, I had lots of opinions. And one thing that I've come to realize is that when CRAs were developed, like any other piece of legislation, there were those who were proponents and there were those who were against creating CRAs. The tone, of course, is that we first have to remember why they were created. And everyone knows these buzzwords, slum and blight, right? The beauty in the statute is that it creates a vehicle in which you can creatively address slum and blight and other issues within a redevelopment area. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It tells you need to create a plan to do it and to find ways to implement that plan. It's not narrow-minded. And I think it was done that way. I truly believe, because you can implement a plan in, for instance, the Overtown area different than you can implement it in the Omni area and still achieve the same goal. And so there's much discussion about many things that's been in the media, of course, regarding CRAs. But the one thing that I think has always been constant is that since it was created, there have been efforts to remove it from our way of doing things. And we have to remember that they were created not because they're just slum and blight. It was created because there's been systematic there's been a systematic way of not investing into areas like Overtown by the city, by the government, by the county, and by the state. And someone was smart enough to say, you know, since there has been this abuse of these areas, we should invest dollars into these areas. And to ensure that this gets done, we create this community redevelopment area that will use the tax in the tax increments to reinvest into that particular area. Now, and for instance, in regards to something like Overtown area, it didn't create significant TIF for 30 years. And we all know that there is a lifespan of a CRA. And so when that lifespan is coming to an end, you would hope that you've created enough TIF to actually invest into that area to make things happen. Fortunately, now you're starting to see changes in the Overtown area because of the revenue that's been put in there. But even still today, I look at when I first became chairman of the CRA, the first essay or public statement that I wrote concerning the CRA was the county taking away, or you trying to use a capping ordinance where they took away $800,000 in revenue and did what they wanted with it, and took that directly from the TIF or the CRA area. Next, we also have to remember when we did the sharing agreement, and that was between the CRA, the county, and the city. And the largest TIF producing entities in those, for instance, the Overtown CRA, we had to share their revenue from beyond 2017. Now, share their revenue with the county and the city. So you're taking more of the TIF revenue out of that area. And then I continue to hear arguments that the way they put it, it's been written that the CRAs divert money from the county and from the city that can be used to invest in all other places within the city or the county, which is, to me, just it is against the thought of the reasons why the CRAs were created in the first place, which was to take monies that would have been used elsewhere and spend them there in that area. And so anytime I get a report that to me has the potential to hinder the progress of a CRA, some of these recommendations, when you talk about even the procurement process, hinders the process of the CRA. And I'll show you an example. For instance, we bonded in the Southeast Overtown Parkway CRA $60 million to do what you see is going on right now, affordable housing development with new projects of affordable housing and some other things. And if we had to go through the typical procurement process that the city goes through or the county goes through for that instance, we would not have been able to bond those dollars. We would have had to put them towards the referendum. So it took us, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 years to get to a point where we could even bond. And when I became chairman, my goal was to bond those issues. And what was presented to us was that capping ordinance, and they said in the county that they were not going to allow us to use those funds to bond. We said, as a board, well, we will bond what we have, which was the city's portion, and the portion that's not in dispute, and then sue you for the rest. Because we chose to bond when we did, at the time when we did, we ended up getting, instead of $45 million, $60 million in bond proceeds, and the county succeeding that they cannot sue us and keep that portion of the capping ordinance and keep that tip. So now we receive the full tip. Now, the reason why I say that if you put this towards a referendum, it will hurt our CRAs is because of this. If you are a CRA and you decide that you want to bond another $40 million to build new development, to attract people to that area, to improve upon the conditions there, you have to go through your bond procedure, which may take some time. And then once you go through all of that, say you need a referendum. The referendum may be at a time that is 6 months later, it may or may not be, depending on when in the process you are. But imagine if you see a question on a document that says, will you bond $60 million for development of affordable housing in Overtown? And someone says, well, I'm certainly not paying for affordable housing in Overtown. We won't pay for affordable housing in Overtown. Jackson Memorial Hospital, maybe. Public school system, maybe. But people who live in Overtown, who are driving, who are taking all of our police services, they have all these, whatever negative opinions they feel, and they say no, and you don't bond those dollars, then how do you effectively go about carrying out the mission of that CRA in an appropriate time frame? You can't. And so I say that to you all to say, that is the reason why I believe that certain procurement processes were left out of the CRA, so that you can get things actually done in those areas. And you can get it done without concern of those who don't care for CRAs. There are individuals that have given thoughts and their opinions to the grand jury who have adamantly written against our CRAs. Adamantly written against CRAs. Put out information that I sincerely believe is misinformation. Because, and then leads a grand jury to come up with a report that they feel should be the opinion of the grand jury. And so when you look at things like that, when you look at adding, for instance, county commissioners to a board that is already political in and of itself, if you think that achieving 3 votes on a board is easy, try again. Now, if you add 3 members, say, for instance, from the county, you really then begin to frustrate the progress of that board. Imagine then if just the level of back and forth, the level. Imagine if, for instance, if someone doesn't have the same opinion of this City of Miami Commission. Imagine if we know that we believe in investing in overtime, and I think that all of you who have participated within the Southeast Overtime Parkway CRA have demonstrated that by issuing the bond, by being there for the ribbon cuttings for buildings that will house food markets, and by investing in public housing and keeping away of the gentrification effects in Overtown. You've all done that. But if other people don't understand the CRA and other people don't invest that time and energy to at least reading the statute to understand what things mean. So, for instance, when someone says to me, and it's printed in the newspaper, and I know you shouldn't believe everything in the newspaper, but that for instance, the CRA is invested in block parties. Block parties. In Overtown, we invest in something called the Overtown Music and Arts Festival. This will be our 3rd year, if the board grants it, doing it. And so I said to the mayor one day, I said, Mr. Mayor, when's the last time you've seen 5,000 people in the streets of Overtown? He looked at me, he said, never. And if you've seen, besides the Overtown Music and Arts Festival, 5,000 people in the streets of Overtown, raise your hand. And so the reason that you see those 5,000 people there is because we invest in this Music and Arts Festival. And that Music and Arts Festival attracts thousands of people to a community that would not get that type of attention. Because as I've read in the papers, as I've seen in the media, and as I've learned over decades, people say, don't take your ass to Overtown. People are dying in the streets in Overtown. There's no investment in Overtown. You have no reason to be in Overtown unless you want to buy cocaine, crack, weed, but get it and get out. Or you can put Camilla's house in Overtown. You can expand Lotus House in Overtown. But God forbid if you own property in Overtown, will your property values go up if we continue to put certain things in Overtown without addressing the need for building some type of market rate housing, building some type of not just affordable housing, but housing that's available to people who work for the City of Miami and make $50,000 a year. So I say, you cannot dare to say it's a block party when you have thousands of people spending their dollars at places like Two Guys, Jackson Soul Food, at places like House of Wings, at places where there are vendors all over the street, where they come to see entertainment, and the City of Miami Police will tell you there has not been one incident in the years that we've been doing this. What that shows me is that people now learn about the Lyric Theater. People now learn about the Black Police Precinct. People now learn about being in a community where they'll have a food destination where they can feel safe, and people can buy property and feel like they can be in that area. And if you read the CRA Act, it gives us that authority under marketing this community development area. Because you can build a city, but if no one knows about it, or they're afraid to be there, then no one will go. And so I know I'm long-winded about this because I'm so, I can literally talk about this issue for hours, and I won't. But I will say that when you market a redevelopment area and you spend money to attract people to that area that many of you have never been, have never walked the streets, you are doing nothing different than the GMCVB marketing Miami-Dade County, our historic neighborhoods and the beaches. You are doing nothing different than Visit Florida, who is spending millions of dollars marketing Florida. You are doing nothing different than Visit Tallahassee. But the minute that you start to spend money to say Visit Overtown, there's an issue. I'm here emphatically to say that I will stand in the way of every recommendation that I believe will halt the progress of that community. When the railroad, when the expressway went through Overtown, the reason it went through is because we, who are supposed to be the protectors of that community, did not stand up enough. And I will not sit down when it comes to this issue. And no politician, black, white, or other, county, state, or whomever, who doesn't have an intimate knowledge of the CRA Act, who doesn't have the heart to develop a community like Overtown, who doesn't understand the necessity of the things that we do under the law that is true, that is correct, and that is legal, and who trivializes with such words as block parties, you better beware. Because I know that what we're doing in that area will have a great impact. You all will be proud of it in the future, and it will contribute to the success of Miami. Because if you do not allow these CRAs, especially the ones who are doing the right thing, to continue to act with the authority that they have, what you'll find is that your dear downtown, your dear design district, your dear Wynwood, your dear Calle Ocho, your dear Coral Gables will be threatened. Because we all see it. The poor people are being moved out of Miami. And they don't have a place that they can call their own, and they can participate and become profiteering partners within our communities, at least even in the black communities that they were born in. There will be a revolution. And it's organic. And so I think that those of us who know better should do better. And don't be moved by any person in academia, especially, who theorizes about poor people in my community. I am, my family was, we are poor people who were raised in James E. Scott Community Projects, what you all call pork and bean projects still today. We live in Little Haiti. We live in Overtown. We live and we eat and we breathe every day in those neighborhoods. I can emphatically say, if somebody from Overtown says you're not here, I can say that's a lie because you're not here, because I am in this community. And what we want to do for that community is grow it. And the only way we can is by using the statute the way that we have it and not shackling ourselves so that we can make improvements in that area. And so this should be a robust discussion, but I honestly think that it's probably inappropriate for just this moment on an agenda at a city commission meeting because it goes deep. And like I said, and I'll come to a conclusion out of respect for everyone's time, I want to fight for it. Every step that we can, because now that we're doing it right, they're trying to take it away from us. Commissioner Suarez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you said something that was very interesting. There's been, well, you said many things that are interesting. There's been many efforts to undo CRAs, and there are many opponents of CRAs, whether they're outward opponents or not. I'm very proud of the fact that when I was chair of, and I sat in your chair right now, I had to pass the gavel to make the motion to bond the money to preserve the existence of the CRA. Had we not done that, we may not have the CRA as we know it today, or the resources.
And that took courage. And just think about
Sure
the
did.
fact that you had to, the symbolism in you having to pass the gavel to move, to improve an area like Overtown.
But I will say this too, because I want to be fair. Part of the reason that I challenged you that day, and I know you met and have exceeded my expectations in that challenge, is because I was frustrated by what I felt prior to your arrival was a lack of real movement. And I think, we hear things that have really nothing to do with Overtown, by the way, because remember that one of the things about this report is that it doesn't specify, doesn't call out any one particular person. I know they have some references to things that you can maybe connect the dots or whatever, but it doesn't really call anybody out per se. We've heard floated out there the possibility of gap funding for museums or whatever the case may be, and those are the things that I think catch people's attention. Not only have we invested in affordable housing, which I think particularly in Overtown is important, we've also invested in things that go to quality of life. For example, supermarkets. People take that for granted. I remember when we voted on the grant for the supermarket, that I counted the number of supermarkets within walking distance from my home. I had one on 37th and 16th, another one off Lejeune and Cora Way, and another one off 27th and Cora Way. And yet there was none in Overtown. So it was a food desert. CRAs are hard. They're hard for a variety of reasons. If they're successful, they could potentially create gentrification, and that's a challenge. I think one of the ways we've met that challenge is by doing rehab projects, which, by the way, had not been done before you arrived. We did a $10 million investment in Town Park that had not been done. And the big reason why...
No, it was $15 million.
Sorry, my apologies.
For South, $10 million.
That's right, $10 million and then plus 5 for the other Town Park, exactly, 15 total. And I've often said that's one of my proudest moments as a CRA board member. But the point is that we're stemming the tide of gentrification, which is a real problem when you redevelop an area. The other problem is, and I think the other controversy is, we voted on a big project that is a TIF driver. And so, and I think at a Sunshine meeting, the vice chair mentioned it, TIF driving projects are important projects for the CRAs to invest in, but you need to see the backside. And the backside is that once that TIF is generated, you have an investment, a tangible investment in the community, either in the form of affordable housing units, which we now have in Overtown, or in jobs, in real jobs, and in real industry that will help us get to a point where we don't need the CRA, and will help us get to a point where we don't need affordable housing. Because I think what we talked about at the last CRA meeting, I think it was the last one, when we were reducing the affordability period on a project, was I supported that because the objective should be that at some point we have created the conditions under which people in impoverished neighborhoods can get out of that condition. And that's something that I'm very proud of your work, because you haven't only confined that to the CRA, you brought that to the City Commission in the context of crime and some of my initiatives on crime and crime reduction. You said, hey, Commissioner, I really appreciate what you're doing in that realm, and I think it's important, but we need to look at the symptom. And the symptom in many cases is the lack of opportunities. It's the poverty. And, just like somebody said earlier today that Ms. Baker was a force to be reckoned with, I think you can be a force to be reckoned with. And it's been great serving with you. To me, institutional reform is something that I actually enjoy. I don't really have a problem with it. I propose it at the city, I propose it at the MPO, I propose it just about everywhere I've gone. So it doesn't particularly worry me too much. I don't take it that way, but I understand others may view things differently. Look, I think, again, my statements to people who would be viewing this is that Overtown and the CRA is heading in the right direction, that our new leadership in Omni seems to have pivoted in a different direction, in a direction that I support and that I am excited about. And we have a lot of hard decisions in front of us, and this is not easy stuff. Everything that we do is ripe for criticism, everything. And I think we are on the ground, and we are dealing with these issues intimately, and we do feel the pain. And one of the reasons why I was so frustrated when you came on board was because I really felt that the money wasn't at that time being put to work. And I think since then it has been, and I think that's something that you deserve a lot of credit for. Thanks.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Vice Chairman and Commissioner Gordon.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was invited the other day to the Lyric Theater to Chamber of Commerce breakfast, where the executive director of the Overtown CRA gave a full presentation, block by block, what the Overtown CRA, as Southeast Overtown Park West CRA has accomplished. And it's impressive. I mean, these are the unsung songs of accomplishment in terms of affordable housing, community development, education. So many good things are happening. And the ease with which the CRA allows us to accomplish those goals is a testament to that. And the fact that it's being used for the right goal. So why do we allow us to subject ourselves to the press, the public scrutiny that would say, and not the Southeast Overtown in particular, but that CRAs are being misused? And I think a lot of it is misperception in the sense that when you say this is an agency focused on developing a community, eliminating poverty, slum, and blight, and then they see a big crystal tower go up, they say, well, that's not what we were thinking about, and it can get used. And of course, it's part of its public education for them to understand that part of the job of the CRA is to develop the TIF, to develop the tax increment funding that will then be used for good. And so to develop that, we need to do big projects. Sometimes we need to do TIF agreements that enable developers, and that will generate the funds. And then we have to then expend those funds properly. And I see a lot of that happening in Overtown. And so I wonder what we're doing wrong that is creating a public perception otherwise. And so the only thing I can think of is that if we as a board of 5 up here put on a new hat and we become the board of 5 of a CRA, and we know our communities, we know our district, we know what's best for them, and we're going to implement this plan, we're basically telling the community, trust us. We know what we're doing, we know what's best, and we'll get it done, we'll get there, regardless of procurement process, regardless of different things. And for me, that's not good enough for what we owe the public in terms of transparency and involvement. And I think that nobody here, including the grand jury, is trying to undo the CRA. We're trying to create it into a accountable force for good. Now, perhaps some of the steps may be heavy-handed and maybe some of them aren't. And that's part of what I wanted to bring here today, and having our city attorney and all of us here together is a chance for us to discuss the specific steps. Procurement was one that you had mentioned, and I've been meeting on a weekly basis with the executive director of the Omni CRA, who's been excellent at bringing me up to speed in what the Omni has been up to and what it's accomplished. And according to him, we actually do follow the city's procurement procedures, regardless of the need to do so. But why isn't the need to do so in there? And if it needs to be streamlined somewhat, considering bonding and issues like that, let's try to do it in a way that becomes transparent for the public, that they see every step of the way that what we're trying to accomplish and the means through which we're trying to accomplish it all makes sense and pass the smell test of what a CRA should be doing. I was let down to see the good things done in the Omni CRA, for example, that they didn't then go that extra step. We're generating TIF, but we're not expending it to what it should be done. And to what Commissioner Suarez said earlier, the broad requirements or the broad task, the mission of the CRA is possibly put in there to allow it to be used with flexibility. But to me, that might be a little too much flexibility, because the elimination of slum and blight, full stop, is not enough. It's because, yes, I could put in 20 crystal towers that moves out every resident that lived there, And yes, technically you have eliminated slum and blight, but have you done good for that community? And so one of the recommendations was an oversight of not just financial accountability, but mission accountability. And I think that could be something tremendous, to really look back at the redevelopment plan, which is an official document that said this is your roadmap of what you're trying to accomplish in the CRA, and grade us along the way. Have we done it? Have we done it? Because of the good things, even in the Omni, a tremendous new movie studio that could generate TIF and create good things for the community, it's not providing jobs for the people that live there, and it should. A dog park that was spent nearly $500,000 on in the Omni CRA. Could the argument be made that improving a park will increase home values nearby that will generate TIF? I think it's a stretch. And to the neighbors, I was at a homeowners association meeting where I had to defend this, and they said, no, we love that dog park, and for the Herald to demonize that dog park, well, we want answers. And I said, no, you as citizens, fully in your rights to want that dog park. And me as your commissioner, it's fully within my job to help get it there for you. Now, should it have been used? Should money meant for anti-poverty causes been used for that dog park? Well, for me, it didn't pass the smell test in terms of, did it generate TIF? No. And did it eliminate slum and blight? There was a perfectly good park there already, so again, no. So that doesn't pass the test. And so I really want, the transparency there, the process there, the decision-making there, and I guess oversight is good and debate is good. One of the other probably confrontational things that we'll be up against that's in this report is whether or not to include more board members. And by the statute, if I understand correctly, we have the ability to have 2 more board members on each CRA, up to 7. We have 5 right now, which is us basically. But to have a member of the community and then someone from the county, which I assume would be appointed by the county commission. I'm not fully versed on the terms of how we change that, if we want to change that, and who would do that appointing and how that would then come about. Would it create more debate on the board? Absolutely. But to say, would a county representative, of which that TIF is partly county money, also know what's good for our community? I would hope so. I think when it comes to personalities involved, it may shift some of our thoughts, but if I think we think CRAs in general and the intention, I would be open to more input on our board. I even questioned whether we or any of us should be on the board originally when I was looking at CRAs and how they're made up. In some parts of the country, CRAs don't have the city commission as the board members because they can be swayed by lobbyists who, by the way, are not required to register to visit the CRA, if I understand correctly, but they are to visit us here in City Hall. That's not even one of the grand jury's recommendations. I'd maybe even add one of my own. But I really want it clear that I am in no way trying to cripple the ability of a CRA to do good. I want it to do good and be cheered on by the community for doing good. I want us to leave not just knowing in my own heart that we did good, but everyone hated us for it, but that we did good and we did it in a way that the community could be proud of what we accomplished as well. So I think we're on the same side here, and that there's no one trying to, and so I guess if I could indulge if the chair would indulge me, I would love to hear from Frank Schnidman, who wrote this letter, who might just be able to paraphrase it for us in terms of his recommendations to us of what the city as a commission may or may not be able to implement, and perhaps our city attorney as well. If there's any specific recommendations that were made by the grand jury that we as a city commission should or could be weighing in on, versus just the board of each CRA individually or the county or the state.
And I will say, and I'll let Mr. Gore before Snitman comes, Frank Snitman is one of those individuals who is educated on community redevelopment agencies, who's worked as an executive director, I believe, of a community redevelopment agency, but has said inflammatory things about our agencies, about the Overtown agency, that to me is more landed in opinion versus in real truth and facts. So I've read many things that Snitman has written, and I've written Snitman, and he's written me back, and he's boasted about his resume. But at the end of the day, there is no other CRA that you can think of that is more in the position as different as the Southeast Overtown Parkway CRA. It's not Lincoln Mall, not Omni, not Lincoln Road, not Omni, not any of those CRAs because of the history that exists within that area. And so when we set out trying to improve upon CRAs in general, such as designating a percentage of their income for affordable housing every year. Well, what do you say to the CRA that's already generated more affordable housing than all those CRAs combined?
They're above and beyond the requirement.
But what that means is that you cripple that CRA. You're saying to that CRA that you must designate a certain amount of those funds for that affordable housing. What about introducing other types of housing to the area? What about introducing different type of commercial uses to the area? Why say to a CRA that has done what it's supposed to do, that has generated not just new affordable housing, but has rehabbed hundreds of affordable housing for people that live there in that area, so they're finally seeing some use of the CRAs to affect them every day, like we did in Town Park North, Town Park South, and we're doing in Town Park Village, and in individual apartment complexes within there. When those people then have affordable housing, just because they were able to move and improve upon their areas and people can't come in and lowball them on buying their homes, that's how we slow gentrification there. You can't stop it because people have a right to sell their home. That's their God-given right in the United States of America. So don't think that gentrification is as the result of the government, because it's not. It's the result of individual homeowners who decide that they're going to sell their property for a profit. But we can slow it down by giving those who don't want to sell for a profit, but who just want to live in their homes where their roof is leaking, but they have mold in the walls. We as CRS can help that, and that's what we've been doing. And so I just want to be careful because we use words like, we use buzzwords. We use affordable housing, this, that, and the third. And I'll go on the record. I said in Overtown, and I'll continue to say it, that Overtown has enough affordable housing. And people say, well, how? Because the people that live in Overtown can afford to live there. That's why they have enough. But what they need is better quality of life. Those that live in housing that is affordable, that is substandard, it needs to be brought to a certain standard. But we will, like we've done, introduce new affordable housing projects to that area. But Overtown can't be, and I'm going to use this term, it can't, well, no, I'm not using affordable housing. Overtown can't be the affordable housing place in Miami-Dade County. Overtown can't be the homeless shelter center in Miami-Dade County. Overtown can't be the social services place to go in Miami-Dade County, because there are homeowners there that were there before the expressway and that are still there, that want their property values to increase. And introducing all of these services to an area and making it something that is transient in nature, where all the homeless people have moved from downtown to Overtown, and where the enforcement of pottage and everything is not going as we should want, that's affected by the kids that live there in Overtown. So when I walk through Overtown, or when I drive through Overtown, or when I'm eating in Overtown, this is what we see. And so redeveloping an area, eliminating slum and blight, introducing infrastructure to that area, which is what many of these, even if they're shiny things in the air, this is what they do. But in Overtown, the one thing that you can't forget are the people that live there. And I'm not going to forsake the people that live there, for people that have never visited, for people that theorize about it, or for people that go into a small group and tell them what they should feel about redevelopment in those areas. And so that's what I believe that Frank's statement does. Commissioner Gordon.
Let me tell you, I'm going to give you just very brief. I'm going to be very brief. I was elected in 1993 into 2001. And I can tell you, decisions that were made in the 90s is what helped create the TIF funds that you receive after many years. Because Overtown didn't get their funds at least after 5 or 10 years afterwards. So they didn't have their funds at those times. And I can tell you from looking at the neighborhood, I never forget in the late 90s when the people from McCarty came to me and said, we're going to sell the building because I don't think this area is going to go anywhere. We're talking about Biscayne Boulevard, the whole area. I think you've seen the changes that have taken place in that area and the improvements that can take place in that area. You can create affordable houses, but you can also create ghettos. So you need to mix the economic development with affordable housing. And I, as an elected official, feel very proud of the work that I've done in the both CRA. Thank you.
So you had brought up one of the other recommendations was that the grand jury had made was that each CRA set aside 10% of the TIF, of the income, to be used for affordable housing. And in the case of the Southeast Overtown, it seems they've gone far above and beyond that. So I'm not quite sure how this recommendation would actually restrict, unless maybe it's about changing the wording of it, so it's not an annual 10%, but an overall TIF that I would guess to say in the lifetime of the CRA so far, you spent well more than 10% of that TIF. However, in the Omni, we haven't even come close to 10%, if even 1% of the TIF generated has been spent on affordable housing in the Omni. So I think a requirement like this isn't really speaking to the ones who are doing it, and it shouldn't restrict or cripple them. If you're saying mission accomplished of affordable housing in that CRA, I'm sure that well more than 10% would have already been spent, and you shouldn't be restricted with those TIF funds on an annual basis. But for the ones who certainly aren't, I think it's a good recommendation.
Can I say something quickly before you?
Okay, I just want to make a refinement to what he said.
Yeah. When it comes to the requirements of for instance, the affordable housing, I'll say this: there is no requirement for CRAs to create affordable housing. There is none. The statute says that CRAs, I'm going to use the word either may or should, or one of those words, create affordable housing or explain in their plan why they are not. So it is up to that community redevelopment agency, well, it's actually up to the plan, which takes input from the residents, et cetera, which is how we have our plan within the Overtown CRA that talks about job development, things like that. We have that because the people that live there have those as a concern. And so the affordable housing was a concern, and that's what we created. But we have to remember that there is not necessarily a reason to create affordable housing in every CRA. Should there be? That's a discussion, but there's not necessarily.
And that's what I was going to say, Mr. Chair. I think, one refinement to the Vice Chair's point, which is, I think it said for agencies that generate more than $5 million, it should actually be 20%, if I'm not mistaken, an annual TIF.
Yes, you're right.
Right. So, and I think your point is well taken, but I also agree with the Vice Chair that we can self-regulate and say, hey, we should have a minimum of 20% of affordable housing, and I think we can do it just in the Omni, you know what I mean? And I think the issue is that the Vice Chair is concerned that hasn't happened. And so even though it has happened in the Overtown area, I think from the bond money, if you consider renewal projects part of affordable housing, which I think you can arguably do, I think you're talking about 80 or 90%. Some very, very high number of the bond proceeds that we use, the capital funds. I mean, I think it was almost the whole thing. So, certainly, I agree with your point that in Overtown, we're way beyond that threshold.
But how do we get there, though? We got there because the CRA owned land. We got there because, because of the value of the land. So, but in the Omni, it's not necessarily the same.
I agree. But what I'm saying is I don't object to the Vice Chair, who's the chair of the Omni, saying, hey, look, we want to, I'm changing the philosophy here. I'm turning the corner.
I follow the direction.
That's what I'm saying. And I think if we're generating more than $5 million of TIF, we should self-regulate and say that at a minimum, we're going to provide 20% of our funds towards affordable housing. I think that's a good self-regulation. We've done that. I think you proposed one with reference to the SAP or the NCD in Wynwood, where we talked about maintaining a certain percentage of the TIF funds, if you will, or of the self-created funds for affordable housing in that area. So it's sort of a similar concept. So I have nothing against, particularly the chair of Omni saying, hey, look, we want to recognize and make a statement to the public that we recognize that the back-end stuff hasn't happened, and so we're going to auto-regulate based on this report, and we're going to make a policy decision that we're going to spend no less than 20% of our funds on affordable housing. We may decide in the future, since it's an auto-regulation, 5, 10, I don't know if we're going to be here, but sometime in the future, some commission may decide, look, we've already done that, and now we can release ourselves of that auto-regulation, and we can focus on other things, assuming the CRA is still in existence at that time.
And I agree with you there. I mean, My thing is that I guess it's almost like a states' rights thing, states versus federal government. The CRA is tasked with knowing what's happening in that community. And so what I don't want to see is the state then change the law to require that CRA to do something that's going to negatively affect my CRA because in another jurisdiction, they spend 90% of their revenue on administrative costs. That's what I don't want.
Well, similar to what we were talking about with the DOJ earlier, the fact that we've come a long way in making some of our own steps may have made the process a little easier, even though the city attorney might not say it was that easy, to come to an agreement. And in the same spirit here, if we self-regulate and start implementing some of the grand jury recommendations that we find to be useful and not restricting to the extent that we won't be able to accomplish our goals, will be looked on favorably from the state level, and some of these things won't be imposed on us in a way that we wouldn't want and that would actually cuff our hands and in the ability. But we need to be accountable to somebody other than just ourselves, because that really that gains the trust that we need to show that we've done a good job at the end of the day, and we can prove it. I mean, in the Omni, one of the things about the board makeup, even though I'm the chair and I'm also the district commissioner for most of what's in that what's in the Omni area, I'm going to look for collaborative input and ideas and thoughts as we move forward. And in addition to the board of a citizen, who would, in my opinion, one of the recommendations that they be a specialist. I've got other thoughts that maybe they should be a stakeholder within the community, that's almost a watchful eye to be a constant voice to us about whether we're truly addressing the issues on the ground from a constituent level. I guess I'd like to ask the city attorney about the board makeup situation. Whose position would it be to actually implement that change? Is it the CRA board at the board level, the city commission, or is it going to be handed down to us from the county and the state, or what sort of agreement would need to be made if we were open to changing that in one of the CRAs?
May I, Mr. Chair? Statute 163.35 allows the CRA board to appoint additional 2 board members. However, that being said, I think it's imperative that we look at previous agreements that the CRA, the City of Miami, and the county entered into, the interlocal agreements, to ensure that there's no prohibitions or requirements in any of those agreements concerning the body, the composition of the Board of Commissioners of the CRA. But pursuant to the state statute, the body has the authority to do it.
So we don't need to address that here at the city commission level. That can be done on a CRA by CRA basis, each individual.
Yes, sir. Unless, of course, like I said, there is some language in any of the interlocal agreements that power was negotiated away.
Okay. Please.
The global agreement will have something to do with it?
Perhaps, yes, sir.
Because we had
the only reason I'm not comfortable committing is because there are so many agreements that the city and the county have entered into, including the global agreement and many modifications to the previous interlocal agreements.
The county has to approve it also.
The county has to. So the change could be made at the CRA level, but the county would then approve it.
At the CRA level, again, assuming there's no prohibition in any of the interlocal agreements.
In your opinion, are there any of the recommendations of the grand jury that we as a city commission should take a look at?
The city commission obviously has the prerogative to look at all the recommendations. It is my opinion that there's none that can be implemented by the City of Miami Commission.
Unilaterally.
Correct. What the City of Miami Commission could do, if that is the desire of the Commission, is to pass resolutions urging either the CRA board to take some action, urging the county to take some action, urging the state of Florida to take some action as far as amending the state statutes. But as far as the City of Miami unilaterally imposing or approving any of the recommendations, the City of Miami Commission does not have that authority.
I think introducing a resolution to ourselves at the CRA board might be a little redundant. I don't know. I think it's going to be for us to take up at the CRA board level, and as you said, each CRA has unique makeup geographically, demographically, and the needs. The redevelopment plan is supposed to be our roadmap, and I want to see that looked into and followed, and I look forward to our next CRA meetings where we start taking up some of these I know it's going to be spirited. I know it may be heated, and I think we're on the right track of the right intention. But if I did ask, and with a grain of salt, because I do recognize that there can be strong rhetoric when it comes to this on both sides. But I was Professor Schnibben had written a personal letter to me, and I just wanted to share it with the board, and if he would be able to verbalize at least that, and I would. I think he will hopefully restrict himself to the contents of the grand jury recommendation in the letter and not our specific CRAs or the specific personalities or issues or decisions, but rather my request to him was similar to what I had asked our city attorney about what from his expertise could be recommendations that we as a city commission could look toward.
You're recognized, Mr. Schnibben.
I gave my copy to the clerk.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Schnibben. I am the John M. DeGrove Professor and Eminent Scholar at Florida Atlantic University. And I've had a long and interesting career as it relates to redevelopment and economic development.
Address?
Your address?
Yes. My address is 1858 Northeast 34th Street in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I began actually working in neighborhood legal services in 1968, dealing with landlord-tenant issues in Springfield, Massachusetts. I went on to deal with recreational development planning in the Model Cities program in Rochester, New York. I had the opportunity during my career to spend a number of years with my mentor, Charles M. Haar, who was the Brandeis Professor of Law at Harvard Law School. I spent a couple of years there as a visiting scholar. Charles is the one who authored the HUD legislation. He was the Assistant Secretary for Metropolitan Areas, a confidant of Lyndon Johnson. He's the author of the Model Cities program. He's the author of the Title X New Communities program. He'd been involved in significant urban renewal, urban redevelopment activities. I've had the opportunity to be involved in the judicial process, and one of the involvements that I had was in the Kelo case, which related to eminent domain and redevelopment, a case where the brief that I wrote was cited by Justice Stevens as authority in the majority opinion. But to get to the specifics here of what we're talking about,
thank you.
Remember when Attorney Horn talks about the grand jury report, it's about a dozen other CRAs that exist in Miami-Dade County. And it is not just the Omni CRA or the Southeast Overtown Park West or the Midtown CRA. There are a number of others that are at issue. And, for example, the whole question of slum and blight, the last recommendation about when you come for an extension, you should redo a slum and blight. You wonder about that. But if you think about what happened in in Miami Beach, you had an obligation of the county to give the city $18 million, and in return for the forbearance of that $18 million, they extended the life of the CRA and gave the county an $800 million obligation to fund a convention center redevelopment that, because they were tax increment funds and not general funds, avoided totally any kind of referendum. And so that's an example of the fact that they're not picking on you. And I don't think Kathy Rondo feels that they're picking on Miami. It's an investigation of the operation and the governance and the implementation of the efforts to alleviate slum and blight. And for those of you who don't think that affordable housing is important, please remember that if you look at the beginning of the statute and the justification for why, in finding of necessity, which is the basis for establishing the CRA, it is because there's an affordable housing problem. And additionally, the Act is 50 years old. It was passed in '69. In the mid-'80s, the statute was specifically amended to put all that affordable housing language in it. They didn't just make another definition of blight, but they actually, in a half a dozen places in the statute, amended the statute specifically to talk about affordable housing. And that doesn't mean that when the grand jury report talks about affordable housing, it's talking about Southeast Overtown Park West, or it's talking about Omni, or it's talking about Midtown. It's talking about what in a grand jury that was impaneled in May and met until January, recognized as a true problem. Now, one of my students said to me in looking at the Miami CRAs and the grand jury report, why is it that the county doesn't have a CRA for Liberty City? Why is it that the county doesn't have a CRA for Little Havana? Right. Now, why is it that the county mayor feels that he doesn't need a CRA to redevelop Liberty City? Now, when we look at the activities of the CRAs, transparency is critical. And I can think, in my involvement with Miami-Dade County and the city, and many of you came to know me when Roberto Martinez and I represented Norman Brayman in the litigation relating to the Marlins Stadium. I can only think of 2 times when the CRA met between Christmas and New Year's in order to deal with an emergency project. 1, the global agreement, and 2, the passage of incentives for the World Center project.
I was going
to stop him for 1 second.
Sure.
Because, you know, I'm going to ask you a quick question.
Yes.
What's the regularly scheduled meeting date for the Overtown CRA?
It's, I honestly don't know.
It is the last Monday
Yes.
of the month.
Correct. Okay.
You know what the last Monday of the month was in December? The day that we met.
Okay.
We attempted to have the meeting sooner in the month to make accommodations for board members. Our residents who live in Overtown, most of them, you know where they are during Christmas time? In the Overtown CRA, or in the Overtown community. And so I say that to you to say, when you write, when you advocate, when you try to make it seem as if this board met to deceive the hundreds of people that were sitting in that meeting that evening, you are factually incorrect and you are misguiding their thoughts.
Sir.
And I say that to you because the meetings that we have are regular, they're scheduled. When we have, if you come to any of our meetings, there are typically at least 100 people there that are from that area. When you come to a meeting, for instance, with other CRAs, you barely see that. You barely have this amount of people in the room. The Overtown CRA didn't do anything and has not done anything to deceive that community. Moreover, there was an ethics complaint. I don't know if you all know this, but there was an ethics complaint that was written. Well, there was an ethics complaint that was, it should have been filed, or at least a complaint made to the Ethics Commission regarding the public hearing during that time and regarding us having the meeting then. And we were cleared by the ethics complaint, by the Ethics Commission, saying that, look, they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't violate any rules. Everyone had a chance to speak. Because the Overtown CRA is one of those creations that allows everyone to have a say in what's happening in their community. This report that was written by the grand jury, one of the lines in it said that the CRAs that have the commissions on it, that are the governing boards, they all meet in the lunchtime of their normal city commission or county commission meetings. And thus, they just switch a hat and they talk about the CRA business. That in and of itself is not a true statement. Because we all know, those of us who are in Overtown, those of us who are on the board, those of us who report on the Overtown CRA know that we meet at Camilla's house on the last Monday of every month. And I believe it's at 5 o'clock, whatever it is on time. That's what we do. And so
this is a discussion item. This can go on forever. I recognize we have lunch period. I recognize we also have executive session, and then we have some time certain. So I'm going to have to cut this to an end. But the one thing I will say in conclusion, that report mentioned the Florida Redevelopment Association, and they gave it this beacon of light, saying that this association should. Well, if you read the report, it'll tell you exactly what they said about it, but they looked to the association as some symbol of hope. And I'm going to read to you a letter from that association. This letter was sent to the FRA members, and it says, CRA's Economic Opportunity Creators, a message from the Florida Redevelopment Association. On February 3rd, 2016, the Miami-Dade County Grand Jury filed a report entitled The CRA's the Good, the Bad, and the Questionable. This misguided report makes inaccurate claims and falsely asserts that the highest priority of the Florida Community Redevelopment Agencies should be affordable housing. This narrow view of CRAs reduces and mistakes their value and mission as versatile revitalization engines. CRAs are incredibly successful tools for breathing new life into city areas that have been neglected or forgotten. Their purpose is to eradicate slum and blight in its many forms in a community through leadership and a publicly vetted redevelopment plan, which includes investing in public-private partnerships and leveraging tax increment financing. While a CRA nurses an area back to health through a strategic blend of redevelopment initiatives, it provides the building blocks and incentives for others in the private sector to be able to invest in and develop these communities, leading to a stimulated economy. CRAs are created by local governments to respond to local needs and concerns. Overall, the comprehensive community redevelopment plans that are created and implemented by CRAs are uniquely designed to address that area's specific needs for revitalization. Creating affordable housing is just one of the many roles that CRAs may play and should be part of a balanced economic development strategy. There are a variety of community, state, and federal programs with the primary mission of providing affordable housing, and CRAs consistently partner with and invest in these programs. Chapter 163, Part 3 of the Florida Statutes, the statute which governs the CRAs, is designed to be adaptable to Florida's widely diverse communities. The grand jury report asserts CRAs are not accountable for their spending, and therefore public tax dollars are being abused by city officials. But by allowing elected officials to make decisions as CRA board members, CRAs provide representation to taxpayers from someone most knowledgeable in what a community's needs are and someone who is most accountable for the use or misuse of public resources. There is much transparency in how CRAs spend their money, but there are four different reports or audits that CRAs are required to file, which cover pertinent budgeting and project information and must be publicly posted on the CRA's official website as mandated by Chapter 189 of Florida statutes. In addition, it is erroneous for the grand jury report to claim that constitutional, statutory, county, and local requirements for open government, competitive building, contracting, and reporting are not followed. All entities involved with CRAs, including board members, employees, lobbyists, contractors, vendors, etc., must comply with Chapters 112, 287, 163, and other provisions adopted to Florida statutes that govern open government policies. No governing body is perfect, including CRAs, but the grand jury's report's suggestion that changes need to be made to state statutes governing all CRAs is not merited based on the review of a small number of agencies in Miami-Dade County. Any issues derived by the grand jury regarding specific CRAs should be addressed at the local level through the local governments which establish the CRAs in question. The Florida Redevelopment Agency looks forward to working with any interested parties to provide information on CRA's legal practices, challenges, and successes. We thank the grand jury for suggesting that the FRA is the respected source for redevelopment guidance statewide. We keep a database of CRA case studies all around the state, including Miami-Dade County, and we are continuously educating members and anyone interested in community redevelopment through our certification program, workshops, annual conferences, and webinars offering best practices and expert advice. And then it gives you a place where you can visit. You may visit www.redevelopment.net for more information on how we serve our members and exceptional work CRAs are doing in Florida. So the CRA Redevelopment Authority takes offense to what was actually written in that report. And so I don't want any of us to walk away thinking that this report was God sent. It is the ultimate say on what should be done, but merely a statement of opinions by 21 individuals that were impaneled to give an opinion based off of the evidence that was presented by some witnesses and by some authorities on CRAs. And I don't know if any of you said were a part of it, but you probably, I don't know if you can tell, but I know I certainly was not. So if there's any other further comment from the board, I know that we want to make it to our lunch so we can have time to come back.
Chair, I ask to be recognized before you break for lunch for 1 minute.
I'm not going to do that. I know we want to recognize this gentleman here.
So
this is a
discussion is
item.
not open to the public?
No, it's a discussion item that dealt with what the city commissioners, no action being taken.
No, I
But I'll
thank
stay
you.
back for you. I'll stay back for you.
I thank you for your time, and I look forward to us taking this up at the CRA level, at the board level.
I need, if I may, Mr. Chair,
Excuse me?
if I may, have a additional comment to your comment about the meeting that occurred between Christmas
No, I
and
think
New
you've
Year's.
written enough about it.
No,
I think so. And I read your emails. So I've gotten all kinds of information. I see what you send to your students and the opinions that you generate from them.
Right.
I follow you very well, sir.
Right.
So there's no need for that. So I'm
But
going
I
to
think of your character-
recess this meeting. You can talk to me afterwards. I'm gonna
in
recess
all
this
due
meeting at this
difference,
time.
your
We'll be back
char-
at 2 o'clock for the executive session.
It's scheduled for 2:30,
2:30.
and it is up in the...
What do you want me to do? I'm at the women of the body. If you want to make it 3, we come back at 3 o'clock? All right.
It is upstairs in the mayor's conference room.
This meeting is in recess.
Certainly will.
Good item we'd like to address from Mayor Regalado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chairman. The reason that I'm here, and I also apologize for the delay, is because in Congress, the Appropriations Committee is meeting this week and the next week about the budget. And I have a resolution for your consideration urging our congressional delegation to allocate funding for firefighter cancer research at the University of Miami Sylvester Comprehensive Center. The reason for this is because the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center of located in the city of Miami, has just partnered with several fire departments in South Florida, and they have begun a research about chemicals, firefighters, and cancer. And they have just received $1 million from the state of Florida for this research. And what all the municipalities in Miami-Dade County, the county itself, is doing is asking the delegation to put some money so they can do a very comprehensive study about chemicals, cancer, and firefighter. This is only a research for firefighters. So this is the resolution that I bring to you.
It's been properly moved. Is there a second? It's been properly moved and seconded to accept the mayor's pocket item. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Passes.
Thank you, Mayor.
Before we go into the PZ item, there was a item PZ10 that I believe that the city intended to continue. So we want to now carry that motion. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Excuse me, we may be able to address multiple items. Mr. Planning Director, I think there may have been 1 or 2 more items to continue as well.
Can you give us that list, please?
Yes, that is correct. And thank you for the opportunity. I'll briefly introduce myself, Francisco Garcia, Planning and Zoning Director. And the items that we are proposing be continued are as follows. You had mentioned, Mr. Chairman, item PZ10, which we, the city, are the co-applicants for, and we request that that be continued to March 24th. I'm speaking specifically about the rezoning for the property at 240 Southeast 14th Street, and also items PZ1 and PZ2, which are the land use and rezoning application for a property at 840 Northeast 78th Street. That, too, we are requesting be continued to March 24th, if it is your pleasure to do so.
Is that all?
Move it.
Second.